Welcome to HiFi Turtle, the #1 reptile adjacent hi-fi page on the internet, bringing the audiophile out of their shell. Today I'm talking about a bookshelf pair of speakers. This is the Starke Beta7. This is the latest loudspeaker creation from Starke, debuted this year, 2024, debuted at Expona back in April. It is a $750 pair of bookshelf speakers, and Starke did send me this pair for the review. Before I continue, make sure you hit that thumbs up, subscribe. It really helps support the channel. Check the links below in the description for ways to help the channel grow. Really appreciate it, and hopefully I can continue to bring you great hi-fi content like this. All right, before we get into the sound of the Beta7s, I want to talk about the fit, the finish, all the features, and what makes this bookshelf particularly special, especially considering the $750 price tag. Looking straight at the finish, I have the gray oaky finish. This is not a real wood veneer, it is a vinyl wrap, but the finish does feature a very nice texture to the surface to give it that kind of wood grain or more real veneer feeling versus what you typically expect from a vinyl wrap speaker. The cabinet construction is MDF, and on the front we have a black vinyl finish for the baffle which the drivers are mounted to. The name Beta7 really plays into the features and style of this loudspeaker, beta being the second letter of the Greek alphabet, B, but also 2 essentially, so we have a bookshelf design in a two-way design speaker. 7 being the 7-inch woofer that is mounted to this loudspeaker. Now, if you'll notice on the very front, we see Starke SMC transducer. Now, SMC is not soft magnetic composite as you'd see in a dolly speaker, but rather a symmetrical magnetic construction. Now, what does this mean? In the context of Starke, this means that the magnetic force, the force that is applied to this woofer, is symmetrical throughout the movement of the woofer. As it moves in and out of the magnetic gap, the force applied by the magnet motor and that applied by the surround, the corrective force to the woofer, is perfectly symmetrical. So the linear motion of the driver is constantly applied with the same force regardless of its position of the voice coil in the magnetic gap. Looking at the front of the driver, we see this is a woven carbon fiber cone, but it's not just that singular layer of carbon fiber that comprises this cone. This is a 4-layer cone design, the back layer being a fiberglass that is sourced from Japan, then a foam layer sourced from Europe, the woven carbon fiber layer that is also sourced from Japan, and then a resin layer that is applied on top of the woven carbon fiber for additional resonance properties, and this is made in the USA. Moving up to the tweeter, we see a silk dome textile soft dome tweeter that is used here. This is a 1.15-inch tweeter. Typically we see a 1-inch or maybe even a 3/4-inch tweeter used, and the reason for this slightly larger tweeter is that allows Starke to move the crossover point down ever so slightly. These cross over at 1850 Hertz. The second being that since this speaker is made with both movies and music in mind, we want to ensure that we can get very high SPLs, that we can get good power handling, and that larger tweeter surface allows for both of those. This tweeter is mounted onto a solid piece of aluminum, which has some resonance defeating properties, but also has a ripple effect that goes into the aluminum that acts as a waveguide and directivity guide for those high frequencies. Look-wise, I like that the woofer does not have any exposed screws. The tweeter does have the exposed screws due to the pure aluminum plate, but these screws, if you notice, are branded Starke, which I think is just a really nice little touch to show that this is something special and only used by Starke. Turning to the back, we have our typical 5-way binding post. These binding posts are a little recessed into the cabinet, so if you're using spades, you may have a little bit more difficulty than if you use banana plugs. My choice was to use bananas with this particular speaker. And then we have the port showing that this is a bass reflex or ported design, and the port is flared and also has some ribbing to defeat the movement of the air and any resonance or chuffing that's coming out of the port. So you have that nice little resonance defeating feature as well on this port design. Starke does make a matching set of stands for the Beta7, which are 26.4 inches tall. I did not have those stands. I used the stands that I typically use with bookshelf speakers, and those are 28 inches tall, so slightly taller than the Starke recommendation. But really overall not that dramatic, and I did play around with, moving my head up and down, and also I think that my couch typically sits a little bit higher than most listening chairs. For comparisons, I really didn't have anything in the Starke's weight class. Really, my only comparison is against the Audio Confidence 50, which for the price of the Confidence 50, you could afford nearly 40 pairs of the Beta7s. So you may think that the Beta7s actually got blasted out of the water by the Audio Confidence 50s. And I would say, yeah, that's a fair assumption, but I would say at the same time, these are a very surprising pair of loudspeakers. Very good, especially considering the price once again at $750, and we'll get into that in just a second. For amplifier pairings, I had a slew of electronics, as I've had the Starke Beta7s through several reviews that I have done now on the channel, including the RSL IA255.1, the Fosse Sound MC352, the Aperion Audio E2 amplifier, which is reviews that will be coming soon, the Boulder 861, and the SPL M1000. And while a lot of those amplifiers and certainly the backing electronics may seem like overkill for the Beta7s, I would say that the Beta7 scales incredibly well. My favorite pairing by far is that with the Boulder 861, which is a $9,250 power amplifier versus the $110 RSL IA255.1 being the most affordable option that I tried these speakers with. No matter if it was that very affordable option or the most extreme option, I would say that the Starke Beta7 scaled incredibly well with any pairing that I threw at it. I didn't feel like they were very picky or particular about any amplifier that I threw at them. For music, I used everything from 200 Stab Wounds to Travis Scott, and I have to say the new 200 Stab Wounds album is an absolute masterpiece. Chef's kiss beautiful. I listened to Release the Stench, which is just a crazy song name to start with, but the just wailing guitars, the layered and textured depth of the instrumentation, the brutality of that song is done so incredibly well on the Beta7. It is not afraid to play those extremely fast, layered, technical pieces that other speakers, especially bookshelves, typically struggle with. Scott, the designer at Starke Sound, told me that really these speakers probably don't need a subwoofer, and the extension of bass down to 39 Hertz in their spec would kind of lead you to believe that that could be the case. Now, typically with most bookshelves, I would say that you almost always want a subwoofer, but I am sans subwoofer, so we tried it without one. And I have to say that the bass response from the Starke Sound Beta7 is very satisfying, but it's going to depend heavily on the kind of music that you're listening to and also on your placement. Now with the Beta7, I kind of cheated a little bit. I wouldn't say that I put these on the wall or in a corner and tried to enhance that bass profile, but I did put them smack dab in front of the Confidence 50 and kind of use the Confidence 50 at times as a barrier or wall to enhance that bass response from that rear port. And I have to say that was fairly effective and gave me a nice little bass bump to these bookshelves, but definitely felt like that, yeah, you could play these without a subwoofer and not feel cheated on the bass, especially playing something from like Travis Scott's Utopia that has a ton of bass, or if you play something from like Young Thug's So Much Fun album, again, lots of bass, although I will say on the Young Thug side that has a lot more sub bass in some of those songs, yeah, you can miss some of those more sub bass hits like on the song Hot, but at the same time, plenty of bass, very satisfying, doesn't feel thin or brittle or anything like that, definitely still gives you a really nice hit of bass. That being said, besides the quantity of the bass, the quality is quite superb as well. Never feeling muddy or filled with cabinet distortion or vibration or anything like that. It is just extremely smooth and a very nice, crisp and refined profile of those bass notes, regardless if they are the double bass of 200 stab wounds, technical death metal, or the more 808 styles of a Travis Scott album. Moving into the mid-range of the Beta7s, I feel like this is something that is just absolutely remarkable about this speaker, especially again, given the $750 price tag. I feel like that most speakers, the delineation between those that are truly high-end and those that are entry-level and more consumer-friendly are the realities of the mid-range, the ability to display vocals in a lifelike and realistic way. I think that that characteristic is one of the reasons why Wilson Audio is so dominant in the market, and I feel like that most people, regardless if they're audiophiles or not, will really tune into that mid-range section and be able to tell if it's something special in that the singer really does feel like they're in the room with those vocals, or if it just feels like, yeah, that's a recording and I can tell that it's not anything particularly special. This is where the Beta7 really surprised me, and even with the lower priced RSL IA 255.1, which all in together combined would comprise a system of less than $1,000, giving me a really truly lifelike presentation of mid-range vocals. And yes, it's not the same as a Wilson or my Dynaudio Confidence 50s or something like that, but it doesn't feel plasticky, it doesn't feel hollow, it doesn't feel unorganic. Moving on to the treble, this is where this speaker can get a little contentious for me, because depending on your placement, your treatment, etc., the amplifier pairings, you may see this speaker as slightly bright. And there are definitely some scenarios with the SPL M1000s, and even with the RSL and the Fosse MC 352, I found myself thinking, yeah, that sounds a little bright. And also especially with the Galleon A75, which again, I think is a V-curve profiled amplifier. So given that these have a little bit of a tinge on the top, it gave it quite a bit of brightness. That being said, I will say that the amplifier pairing will heavily depend on that feeling of that sharpness in the treble. With the RSL and the Fosse, they have treble adjustment, so I could just turn it down about 2 dB and it was perfect, no more harshness. On the Aperion E2 and the Boulder 861 that I feel like are a little less detailed in the treble range, those definitely tuned down that treble, made it perfect. So again, it's going to really depend on the amplifier pairing. And the sound staging and imaging that the Beta7 is capable of is really something to behold, as it does run the full gamut of making the room sound bigger than it really is. It gives the full illusion of that breadth, depth, and panning soundstage in a variety of songs, and can really flesh out that entire soundstage to make your room sound like a concert hall or something like of that nature, which again, for a $750 pair of loudspeakers is hard to fathom. All right, so let's wrap up on the Starke Beta7s. I really enjoyed my time with this loudspeaker, and I think that this is going to be a mainstay in my audio system. In the reference room, it's a little hard because of the Dynaudio Confidence 50s, but I can definitely see these making it into the living room, replacing a powered pair of speakers that I've used for a long time, and especially with these mini amps like the RSL IA255 and the Fosse MC352, able to do that without creating a ton of heft and taking up all of my living room space. I can see them easily competing with offerings from the Polk Sound R100 or R200, the Bowers & Wilkins 700 series, or the KEF LS50 Metas. All of those speakers being in the 4-figure range, where, again, the Beta7 remains readily under the 4-figure range. I really feel like they knocked it out of the park, and I think this is in part because they want to prove themselves in this category of price and also in the more audiophile world, where Starke has been more focused on the home theater application and such. This is definitely an amazing entry into the pure 2-channel, and of course Starke Sound does offer a myriad of subwoofer options to get you that last octave of bass if you feel like you do in fact need it. Again, I want to say a big thank you to Starke Sound for sending these speakers for the review. I really appreciate it. Again, if you like this video, make sure you hit that thumbs up, subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. There are links below in the description for other ways to help support this channel so we can continue to bring great reviews like this to you. And as always, I will see you in the next one.